The latest news about the talks between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, which left me stunned. The White House revealed Donald Trump's main ultimatum to the Russian dictator. And it turned out that today Ankara is the platform where Donald Trump offered Vladimir Putin both the carrot and the stick. We saw Donald Trump publicly shake hands with Vladimir Putin. And at the same time, behind the scenes in the American administration, the toughest move against the Russian economy in recent years was being discussed. Bloomberg writes that the United States is preparing a sanctions strike against Russia's two largest oil exporters, Rosneft and Lukoil. And it's not just about formally tightening the existing restrictions, but about a full-scale blockade, financial, logistical, and technological. Meanwhile, in those same Trump administration rooms, the opposing view is discussed. Reuters publishes a leak. American officials are discussing the possibility of Russia using American and Russian nuclear icebreakers to escort cargo along Arctic routes. Yes, we're talking specifically about commercial logistics, about the Alaska liquefied natural gas and Quelac liquefied natural gas projects. This is about American liquefied natural gas, which they don't want to supply to the market using Russian icebreakers. But only if Putin makes a deal with Trump. My name is Alexei Pecci. August 15 is still on the calendar. Let's discuss it together. You see, there's a fork in the road here. On one hand, there are strict sanctions, and on the other hand, there is equally strict but large-scale cooperation. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. Give it a like, leave any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pecci News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, Bloomberg, citing its sources in the White House, writes that the United States is preparing a sanctions strike against the two largest oil exporters from Russia, the companies Rosneft and Lukoil. Moreover, we're not talking about a formal tightening of existing sanctions, but about a full-scale blockade. The Bloomberg article says that sanctions will be inevitable if there is no real action from Moscow after the summit. Just having a meeting is not a signal to ease the pressure. That is, if Putin does not agree to a ceasefire, to a cessation of hostilities, not just in general terms, but specifically regarding the front line, the mechanism for monitoring the ceasefire and security guarantees for Ukraine. Then America will strike at the main artery of Putin's war. I should note here that Rosneft and Lukoil are the two key exporters of Russian oil, together providing more than 2.2 million barrels per day. That's almost 50% of all oil exports from the Russian Federation. And according to the International Energy Agency, they are the main generators of foreign currency revenue for Russia. In 2024, the combined exports of these two companies brought Russia more than $150 billion. The role of Rosneft is especially critical, as it is closely tied to government contracts and finances infrastructure projects and, which is very important in this context, Russian military projects. A blow to both companies will not be easy. Sanctions can disrupt supply chains, cut off access to dollar transactions, and hit the shadow fleet of tankers that transport oil bypassing sanctions. Most importantly, deny the Kremlin resources to continue the war. You know, it's like a knife to the artery of the Russian budget. But on the same day, Reuters publishes completely opposite information. American officials are discussing the possibility of using Russian nuclear icebreakers to escort American cargo along Arctic routes. We're discussing commercial logistics regarding the Alaska liquefied natural gas and Quelac liquefied natural gas projects. This concerns liquefied natural gas. Still, as they say, let's use the correct names. If the United States allows Russian icebreakers to transport American liquefied natural gas through the Northern Sea route, it won't just be business, it will be a diplomatic deal. Because an icebreaker is not just a ship, it's a symbol of access, influence, and strategic partnership. One of Reuters' sources stated directly, quote, "We are considering all possible ways to ensure the success of American liquefied natural gas projects, including temporary cooperation, with those who have the necessary technologies, and it's been known for 50 years who has them. Victory." Arktika and Yamal are the names of ships built by Rosatomflow, and unfortunately, according to Reuters, this is the only fleet in the world capable of providing year-round heavy passage through the ice. And now American officials insist that the discussion about using Russian nuclear icebreakers is purely logistical and is related to the implementation of strategic projects in Alaska. Well, first of all, this is Alaska liquefied natural gas and Kwilak liquefied natural gas. These routes require year-round navigation through the frozen waters of the Arctic, where the United States objectively does not have a comparable fleet. The only heavy icebreakers, Polar Star and Healy, are objectively outdated, and the new ships are still under construction. Still, even technically, this step is turning into a political gesture, especially as Russia's war on Ukraine continues and the United States considers new sanctions. We're at a crossroads. On one hand, there's the threat of crashing Putin's economy. On the other hand, there's the possibility of partnership with Russian Arctic infrastructure. You may wonder how these things combine, but that's exactly how Trump behaves. You know, he speaks tough, but he offers some flexible terms. On one hand, he threatens to put pressure on oil and oil revenues. On the other hand, you know, he extends a hand like, let's cooperate together in the Arctic. For some, it's a double game. For Trump, it's a deal. He's not a diplomat, he's a salesman selling his service or buying someone else's. If he can get a truce in Ukraine by using the leverage of sanctions and at the same time keep the energy projects, he'll do it. Even if Ukraine isn't aware of it, but it's exactly this approach that worries Ukraine and Europe. Because the talks about a truce, about sanctions, about oil, about American liquefied natural gas are happening without Ukraine's involvement. Zelenskyy made it clear in his morning address that Putin is bluffing. He's trying to put pressure before the meeting and make it look like the sanctions aren't working. In reality, the sanctions are working and severely impacting the Russian economy. Next is the straightforward arithmetic that Zelenskyy mentioned the day before. He says that Russia has 3 times more artillery, but also 3 times more losses. We need pressure, not a pause or flexibility. That's a quote from Zelenskyy. Let's just say that's a simplified translation. Any decision made without Ukraine's involvement is not a ceasefire. It's a temporary respite for the Kremlin. It's an economic deal. Call it whatever you want, but it's not a ceasefire. If the sanctions are postponed, you know, just for the sake of a nice photo from Anchorage, unfortunately, that will be a direct loss. Not for Ukraine, but for Trump. The problem is that inside the United States, this logic seems to work differently. Trump needs to show the American voter results right now. And so in Reuters, one of the officials said directly, "We understand that everything depends on how it will look on camera." So what matters to them is the image, not the essence, but the gesture. And in this context, the use of Russian icebreakers seems to be outside of politics. Editor, it's an attempt to send Moscow a signal that we're ready to cooperate if you show us a gesture of goodwill, a willingness for peace, and so on. It's a fine line on which the entire summit in Alaska is balanced. And now the main question is, will a sanctions package be imposed against Rosneft and Lukoil if Moscow doesn't take any steps, or will the logic of making a deal prevail over the logic of pressure? If sanctions are only a threat, Putin won't respond, and there won't be a ceasefire or any progress. This will undermine trust in both the American strategy and Donald Trump's approaches. And on the contrary, if Trump strikes at Russian oil exports while at the same time signing some private logistics deal on the Arctic, but that would be a completely mixed signal, and it would be unclear how to deal with it or where to go next. While these closed negotiations continue in Anchorage, one thing is clear. Icebreakers and barrels are not just resources, they're not just an economic deal, they are the currency of United States diplomacy. They put both a knife and a contract on the table at the same time, you know, as they say. Or, as I call it, the carrot and the stick. And it all depends on what Putin chooses. That's the Trump-style deal. Let's see what ultimately wins in this situation. But the very fact that Putin is being rewarded for his war is already somewhat inadequate. A bit of a strange world. But I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Bye, everyone.